Today I show you how to create this footer inside of HTML and CSS. So let's keep going by creating the footer for this website. First of all, we obviously need to have some paragraphs, for example, or some links inside of our section. And let's say we want to have 3 sections. So first of all, I target our footer and I give our footer a background color so we can see the footer. And I'd say that we want to have a background of maybe RGB 26, 26, 26, which should be some form of light gray. Now I'm also going to use the class padding section, which gives us some padding top and some padding bottom. But maybe I'm going to create a new padding for the footer because I think maybe 80 pixels is a little bit too much for the footer. So I'm going to use padding footer and I say we have padding top of 40 pixels and padding bottom of 40 pixels. And now we copy the class padding footer and we give this class to our footer. And now we should also already be able to see the background. And as you can see, this is our footer. Obviously it's not done yet, but we'll get there. So let's create 3 divs because my idea is I want to have a div at the left with some links, in the middle with some links, and at the right with some links. So let's start by creating an anchor tag, and inside of this anchor tag we can, for example, say home. Let's copy this a couple of times. Obviously we are not just going to use home, but home makes sense for now. So what we're going to do now is we give this anchor tag a class that has the class white and underline none. And as you can see, this turns the text to white, non-underlined text, because I have this classes white right here inside of our style sheet where we just set the color to white, and underline none sets the text decoration to none. So this is how those CSS classes work. So again, let's paste this in right here. And now let's say for this div we use class of flex, which is also a class I defined that creates a flex box again. And now we set our flex direction, flex to column basically. So we use flex column to set the flex direction to column, and now we have this effect basically. Obviously doesn't really look too good, so we might actually use center or text center. I think that was the class, maybe it wasn't the class. Let me take a look. Center makes text align center. So let's see if this works. So we have home, let's say we have about, let's say we have contact, let's say we have mission, let's say we have team, whatever. It doesn't really matter too much as well. We just want to have some placeholder here. So now we have those forms right here. And let's say we also want to add a gap of 1, which would also, be around 10 pixels right here. Now we have this first div with some hrefs basically. So now let's just take this container. We are going to copy and paste this container twice. And here you can basically say anything. You could say web development. And as you can see, I now created all of those anchor tags. And now we are going to put all of those anchor tags inside of another div. And inside of this div, we use a class of flex, but this time we want to have all of those divs next to each other. So it basically looks like this. So now let's say we want to have justify center to center our content. So now they're all centered, but I also want to have a pretty big gap between the content. So I'm going to use gap 3, might not be enough. So I basically go ahead and create a gap that is a lot bigger by saying, okay, where's our gap? Gap 2, 3, let's create a gap 5, for example, and say that gap here is, for example, 60, or let's say gap 6, which makes more sense with the units. And now we have 60 pixels of space between if we change 3 to 6. So now we have this effect. Maybe this is still not enough, so I'm going to say dot gap 10 with a gap of 100 pixels. And obviously you can change this according to your needs, so I don't have to follow my layout, but this would be an option, for example. Obviously another option instead of using a gap would just be to use justify between, like so. So now we have this effect, and we could also just say, okay, we have justify between right here. Let's just create this entire div and wrap it with another div. We say class flex right here and justify center right here. And now we use a width of 80% for this container, and we center this container that takes up 80% of the width, and we have this effect basically. Obviously, we could also say justify around, and now we would have this effect. And as you can see, it's also responsive to a certain degree. So once we get smaller, it basically adapts to the screen width. And at a certain point, I can't really get any smaller, but at a certain point, we obviously would need to add a breakpoint.